What happens when you suddenly realize the medical system just isn't moving fast enough to save you? Like, do you just sit there hoping the science miraculously catches up in time, or do you try to redesign the entire system yourself?
Yeah, that is the ultimate, really
Yeah.
terrifying question. Because when the timeline of your own body is moving faster than the timeline of global medical research, I mean, the helplessness has to be totally overwhelming. You're basically trapped in this biological countdown while you're just waiting on a massive bureaucracy.
Right. And yet some people look at that terrifying gap and decide to, well, build a bridge. I mean, think about a 29-year-old actor right at the absolute peak of his physical career, getting a diagnosis that guarantees he will slowly lose control of his movement. Michael J. Fox didn't just accept the timeline he was handed.
No, not at all.
He spent years in private, really understanding exactly why the system was failing patients, before coming forward to tear that system down and rebuild it.
Which brings us perfectly into the context of today's exploration. Just to give you, the listener, a clear map of where we are, this deep dive is the second podcast episode based on the really remarkable Parkinson series written by Lyot Portal. And I really want to emphasize that pronunciation for you. It's Lee Thought Portal.
Right, Liat.
Exactly. Written alongside her co-author, Dr. Minna Schmidt. And state clearly, today's exploration specifically covers episodes 4 and 5 of the written series.
Yeah, our first deep dive into their work really set the foundation for this. I mean, we moved from the intimate family memory of Lyot's uncle, Henry Portal, to understanding those visible symptoms, right, to the raw public visibility brought by figures like Ozzy Osbourne.
Right, we looked at what it actually means when a private struggle steps onto the global stage.
Exactly. But the natural question for the second podcast episode is, well, what happens next? What happens when that raw visibility isn't just a PR campaign? Like, what happens when it becomes organized into a machine for funding, for patient data, biomarkers, clinical trials, and, actual scientific momentum?
And the center of the episode today is really that exact shift. Because Michael J. Fox did not only make Parkinson's visible, he helped turn visibility into research infrastructure.
Okay, so to understand how we get to that machine, we have to look at the genesis of Fox's frustration, right? So picture 1991. He's filming the movie Doc Hollywood. And it begins with just a minor finger twitch.
Yeah.
Something so small, so easily dismissible when you're young and working these crazy long hours. But, it didn't go away, which led to an unusually early diagnosis of Parkinson's disease.
And what is really crucial to understand about this period and what Lyot Portal's writing highlights so beautifully is the 7-year silence that followed.
Wait, 7 years?
Yes, 7 full years. For that entire time, he kept this diagnosis entirely private. And those years weren't just a period of hiding or, carrying this heavy psychological burden. They were a profound, agonizing education in the realities of medical research.
Wow. So he lived intimately within the gap. The gap between getting an early diagnosis, seeing the actual slow-moving state of the research, and realizing the massive deficit in the comprehensive systems that patients truly need. It's like finding out your house is on fire, but realizing the fire department is still trying to invent the hose.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
You can't just sit on the lawn and wait, right? You have to figure out how to build a water supply yourself.
Because the urgency is immediate, but the tools simply do not exist. I mean, he was experiencing firsthand how fragmented the science was. So when he finally went public at the 1999 Senate hearing, he didn't take the traditional route.
Right, because you usually expect a celebrity in that situation to simply share their personal suffering, to raise awareness and pull at heartstrings.
Right, but his approach was entirely structural. In that 1999 hearing, his remarks deliberately focused on how the system worked, or rather, how it didn't work.
So he moved his narrative away from private disease management and pointed it directly at public research direction.
Yes. He realized the pipeline was blocked. He identified this massive bottleneck. The traditional scientific funding model was profoundly disjointed. It was kind of like having 1,000 brilliant mechanics working on car parts in separate, locked garages, and nobody had the blueprints to actually assemble the engine.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It was. Scientists were working in strict silos, hoarding data to publish in academic journals rather than sharing it to move promising ideas into actual clinical trials.
Okay, so to break those garage doors open, he creates the Michael J. Fox Foundation in 2000. And looking at the sources, it's pretty clear this was never going to be your typical passive charity throwing checks at random academic institutions.
Far from it. They implemented a venture philanthropy model. They operate much more like a relentless startup incubator than a traditional nonprofit.
Because in standard academia, what, a researcher might spend a year just applying for a grant.
Oh, easily. Apply for a grant, wait another year for approval, and then keep their findings totally secret until publication. The foundation just shattered that timeline.
They fund high-risk, high-reward studies that government agencies might consider too experimental, right? But there's a catch with their funding.
A massive catch. If you want their funding, you have to play by their collaborative rules.
You gotta share your data.
Exactly. Across different scientific fields. They actively de-risk early-stage science to entice pharmaceutical companies to jump in, pushing the science through the pipeline way faster than standard academic funding cycles would ever allow.
You know, looking at this from a broader perspective, for a guy who built his entire acting career on perfect comedic timing, physical movement, and absolute control, there is something incredibly profound about how he used the ultimate loss of physical control to build a system with such precise, unyielding direction.
It really is a brilliant synthesis of his life's work and his life's challenge. He took a disease defined by a lack of bodily control and responded by exerting massive structural control over the environment surrounding the disease.
He turned a personal diagnosis into a foundation, and that foundation into vital research infrastructure. But I have a question about how this actually works on the ground. How does a foundation measure success against something that is largely invisible in its early stages? Because visibility and awareness are great for PR, but PR doesn't cure a neurological disorder. We need hard science.
And this brings us to the critical leap covered in episode 5 of the series. Visibility isn't just PR. Visibility is data.
Data, right.
Fox was among the very first to realize that you have to turn public awareness into structured measurement. You have to make the invisible measurable.
Which means building massive data engines. Because you can't find a pattern if you aren't logging the variables, right?
Right. And one of the most vital systems they built is PPMI, the Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative.
Okay. What does that do differently?
Well, instead of just looking at patients who already have severe symptoms, PPMI created a massive longitudinal data set. It tracks the disease over a long period of time, allowing researchers to look for early biological signals.
Biomarkers.
Exactly. Biomarkers like the alpha-synuclein protein.
So they are looking for the biological smoke years before the symptomatic fire breaks out.
Yes. And alongside the biological data, there is Fox Insight. This initiative is brilliant because it turns the subjective, lived patient experience into shared, objective research data.
Okay. How does that work?
It's a massive platform where patients log their daily symptoms, their medication responses, their environmental exposures.
So a patient's feeling of, like, I'm unusually tired today or my stomach hurts isn't just a fleeting complaint anymore. It becomes a hard data point in a global algorithm.
Which fundamentally changes the timeline of intervention. For decades, Parkinson's was defined exclusively by late-stage visible symptoms. You know, the tremors, the stiffness, the shuffling gait.
The things you can see.
Right. But because of this new infrastructure, coordinated research can now look for biological evidence years, even a full decade, before a tremor ever starts.
That transition is just staggering, and it moves us directly from that infrastructure layer right into the lab to see what happens when you turn on a massive data engine like that. This is really where Dr. Minna Schmidt's scientific layer enters the narrative.
Yes, conducting her research at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging.
Right. And they approach this from a fascinating angle, right?
They do. They focus on aging as the primary risk factor for chronic diseases, effectively taking research out of these disease-specific silos. Dr. Schmidt's work dives deeply into the most prominent theory of how Parkinson's spreads on a cellular level, which is the Braak hypothesis.
Now, I've read about the Braak hypothesis, but I've always found the mechanics of it incredibly dense. From what I gather, it's basically all about a single protein misbehaving. How does one protein take down an entire neural network?
Well, it centers on a protein called alpha-synuclein, which is actually naturally abundant in the brain. But in Parkinson's, this protein loses its normal, healthy 3D shape. It misfolds. And when it misfolds, it becomes sticky and starts to group together, forming these clumps called Lewy bodies.
So it's a structural issue. The protein folds incorrectly, and suddenly it's not just useless. It's contagious to the healthy proteins around it, causing this cascading aggregation.
Right. And that aggregation is generally considered the driving force of the disease progression. However, this massive influx of new data has fueled a really fascinating scientific debate. Some researchers are asking a pretty radical question.
Which is?
Could this alpha-synuclein protein actually start out playing a protective role.
Wait, hold on. You're saying the very thing that causes Parkinson's, the thing destroying the brain, might actually be the body's immune system trying to protect itself from an infection?
Right.
That completely flips the script on how we view the disease.
It totally flips the script. The theory proposes that alpha-synuclein might act as an antimicrobial peptide. So imagine a virus or harmful bacteria enters the nervous system. The protein rushes to the site, clumps around the invader to trap and neutralize it.
Oh, wow.
But then, the system fails to clear away the trap. The clumping gets out of control, spreads like a prion, and causes Parkinson's.
So the defense mechanism essentially becomes the weapon.
Exactly.
But if the protein is responding to an invader, where is the invasion starting? Because the sources outline two entirely different starting points for the disease.
Right. The Braak hypothesis suggests two distinct subtypes of Parkinson's based on where that initial clumping occurs. The first is brain-first Parkinson's.
Brain first. Okay.
This initiates in the olfactory bulb, which is the neural structure responsible for our sense of smell. From there, it spreads downward into the brainstem, and it presents early on with those classic motor symptoms, like the tremors.
And the second pathway.
Body-first Parkinson's. This initiates in the enteric nervous system.
The gut.
Right, the complex network of neurons governing the gut and gastrointestinal tract. The alpha-synuclein starts clumping in the stomach and slowly makes its way up into the brain over a decade or more.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to lock this in. So Parkinson's isn't a single train on a single track. It's two different trains leaving from two different stations, the gut and the nose. But they eventually crash in the exact same central nervous system.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the pathology. Two different origins, same devastating destination.
But that raises a massive mechanical question for me. If the train leaves from the stomach, what track is it taking to get to the brain?
The vagus nerve. It is the longest cranial nerve in the body. It acts as this informational superhighway connecting the gut directly to the base of the brain. The misfolded proteins essentially hijack the vagus nerve, traveling neuron by neuron, slowly climbing up from the intestines into the brainstem over many years.
Wow. Okay, let me push back on the history of our medical response then. If the train is leaving from the gut for so many people and traveling up the vagus nerve, why have we historically only treated the brain?
That is the ultimate systemic failure that Michael J. Fox's infrastructure is finally allowing us to correct. For generations, patients would tell their neurologists about their stomach issues, and the neurologist would dismiss it. They'd say, I treat the brain, go see a gastroenterologist.
Right, the silos again.
Actually, the silos prevented anyone from seeing the whole picture.
But now, with Fox Insight gathering longitudinal data from thousands of patients, the patterns are undeniable.
The data showed a huge constellation of early warnings. We saw profound gastrointestinal issues like severe constipation appearing years early.
It's early.
Yes, and interestingly, this runs chronologically parallel to completely distinct early neurological signs like REM sleep behavior disorder, where patients physically thrash and act out their dreams. We now know that approximately 81% of Parkinson's patients report experiencing these gastrointestinal issues.
81%. I mean, that's a massive, undeniable majority. The stomach issues are really the canary in the coal mine.
The gut is giving us a 10-year warning before the brain shows visible motor signs. And this brings us directly into the biology of the microbiome and the gut-brain axis, which is a major focus of Dr. Schmidt's research at the Buck Institute.
You know, we hear the word microbiome constantly in wellness circles, usually from someone trying to sell us kombucha. But what does it actually mean in the context of severe neurodegeneration?
The microbiome is the vast ecological community of trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses living in our digestive tract.
Right.
They aren't just passive hitchhikers.
Right.
They actively digest our food, they train our immune system, and they produce short-chain fatty acids and neurotransmitters that communicate directly with our brain via that vagus nerve superhighway.
So if the gut is literally manufacturing the chemicals that tell the brain how to behave, what happens when the gut environment becomes toxic?
You enter a state called dysbiosis.
Dysbiosis.
Yeah, it is an unhealthy pathological shift in that microbial community. The bad bacteria overrun the beneficial bacteria. This leads to conditions like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where bacteria from the large intestine back up into the small intestine.
Yikes.
Yeah, the lining of the gut becomes inflamed and overly permeable. It's often called leaky gut.
And when the gut is inflamed and leaking, those distress signals are sent straight up the vagus nerve to the brain.
Exactly. And returning to the antimicrobial theory, if the brain senses that systemic inflammation and bacterial invasion coming from the gut, It might trigger that alpha-synuclein protein to start its protective clumping.
Wow. So keeping the microbiome balanced isn't just about digestion or, feeling bloated. It might literally be the primary mechanism for protecting the brain from degenerating.
Right.
And the wildest part of the sources is that this isn't even a brand new idea. We've known about the importance of gut flora for over a century.
The historical context here is astounding. Over a century ago, Dr. Elie Metchnikoff, who was a Nobel laureate, often referred to as the father of natural immunity and longevity, he realized the profound importance of balancing the gut.
He was a Russian Jewish zoologist and immunologist observing populations in Eastern Europe, right?
He was. He observed that certain peasant populations in Bulgaria who consumed large amounts of fermented milk, which is rich in probiotics, specifically lactobacillus, they lived remarkably long, healthy lives.
Wow.
He hypothesized that toxic bacteria in the gut caused aging and disease, and that introducing lactic acid bacteria could actually prolong life.
He even started the first commercial probiotic company in Paris called Le Ferment in the early 1900s. I mean, he was selling the concept of live bacterial cultures as medicine over 100 years ago.
I know that exact conceptual framework is front and center in Dr. Schmidt's modern Parkinson's research using state-of-the-art multi-omics data at the Buck Institute.
It's like the medical establishment took a 100-year detour, focusing exclusively on treating the symptoms in the brain, only to finally circle back to the gut where Metchnikoff started.
Right.
But this time, we aren't just relying on observations of longevity.
No, this time we have the infrastructure to measure it. We have the data to prove the connection on a molecular level.
Let's step back and look at the massive conceptual leap we've covered today. If we look at the main transition across episodes 4 and 5 of Lab Portal's series, it is this incredible movement from simple visibility to organized infrastructure to concrete scientific measurement.
It really is the evolution of how we fight complex disease. Michael J. Fox didn't just stand in front of a Senate committee and say, "Look at me, I have Parkinson's." He said, "Look at the system. It is broken. Let's build a new one."
Yeah.
He built the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which aggressively funded PPMI and Fox Insight, which finally gave scientists like Dr. Minna Schmidt the longitudinal data they needed to trace the disease down the vagus nerve, to the microbiome, and to the Braak hypothesis.
From a private twitch in a finger on a movie set to a global database tracking the behavior of bacteria in our stomachs, it's truly a story of taking back control. And just to give you, our listener, the full context of this journey, Lab Portal's written Parkinson series continues across a total of 8 episodes.
Yes.
This specific deep dive covered the pivotal section focused on Michael J. Fox, his foundation, patient data, and how visibility became research infrastructure.
And as we wrap up today's exploration, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We talk constantly about the power of data, but we are rapidly entering the age of AI, where data is the absolute currency of discovery.
Definitely.
In this new era, a patient's story, your unique symptoms, your personal timeline, your daily struggles, is no longer just a nice anecdote you tell a doctor during a rush 15-minute visit. It is the fundamental data that algorithms will use to find cures.
That's a huge shift.
But this requires immense trust. Strict guardrails must protect these connections so that vast digital systems do not separate the raw data from the actual people and human conditions that created it. Your lived experience, your specific biological story, might literally be the missing piece of infrastructure needed to solve the diseases of tomorrow.
That is a powerful framing. The house is on fire, but your story might just be the blueprint for the water supply. If you want to read the full, incredible story for yourself, we highly encourage it. To find it, you should search for the Light It Show Parkinson series, Lab Portal, Dr. Minna Schmidt, the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, Michael J. Fox, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, Fox Insight, PPMI, Biomarkers, Patient Data, and Visibility Becoming Infrastructure. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions and keep looking closely at the systems around you.